Hello, everyone. We're back. It's a Friday, and oh, what a week it has been. A week that was been so bad that I just have to laugh at this point. Yeah, Elliott is here with us, and we're talking about something cool, despite how bad this week has been. We're talking about Saruman and Technocracy, or we could say Saruman as Technocrat. We'll see what I actually end up making the title of the episode, something in that vein. Elliott, I hope you're doing well. Hope you've had a good week.
Better than you have.
Freaking tech bro. Tech bro. Yeah, for those interested, for those of us who live in the People's Democratic Republic of Chazchop, there's been just an absolute shitstorm of thefts of Korean-make cars. And so mine was one of the ones hit, and it was a joyride situation and then crashed. So, or something. So it's just knackered and gone. And so, yeah, don't move to Western Washington. Just don't come here. The awkward connection or the transition I'll make is it's literally Isengard or maybe more Mordor. I don't know. But we're here. I'm thankful to be here. And yeah, Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings, it doesn't fix all of the world's problems, but it fixes a lot of them. At least it fixes your mind on what's important. Yeah, so Technocracy, Saruman. We've sort of hinted at Saruman over the past couple episodes since we've started our Lord of the Rings series. We talked about, we did it kind of out of order. We talked about Saruman's death in our Scouring of the Shire episode. Now we're sort of talking about the maybe the peak of his career. Yeah. I sort of had intended to plan this out a bit better, but cars stolen, things like that. But let's just jump into it. Elliott, I know that you have a lot of thoughts. You've been thinking quite a bit this week about technocracy as a thing. Do we want to start with Saruman or technocracy, or just take them both at the same time?
I'm happy to. I'll just do a quick intro to Technocracy. Yeah, exactly. Because the Saruman, I think people are going to be a lot more familiar with. Yeah. So when I'm using in this case the term technocracy, a lot of people know the general idea of like rule by experts, and that is not really what we're talking about, right? There's that certainly is in part what Saruman is about, for sure, but that's not really what I'm referring to. I'm referring to the specific political movement called the technocrats, right? And that might sound strange, but in the 1930s, there was actually an explicit American political party who called themselves technocrats. They were the founding guy was basically an engineer.
Okay.
And
no surprise.
Yeah, exactly right.
Engineers, man.
And every time, dude, don't put them in. I mean, if we know Germans and engineers, don't put German engineers in charge. So technocracy comes from techna, which is Greek for skill, right? And cracy, which is power, right? So skill power of the skillful, right? So the 1930s, there was this dude named Howard Scott who came up with a bunch of very funky ideas for how he felt like society would be most efficiently and happily run. And it comes from a lot of the insights of the technocrats, or a lot of their notions of what's good, or the way things ought to run, will sound very familiar to a lot of people who are, aware of a lot of conspiracy theory stuff, right? So essentially, his idea was that money, currency, and price systems are bad, right? That they essentially, don't like the idea is that as abundance gets more, right, as you get more stuff, as abundance gets prevalent, then the price of stuff goes down until it eventually hits no price, right? And under technocracy, we want to make everything as abundant as possible, so price systems are nonsense at that point. So we need to abandon money and prices and that type of value entirely, right? Instead, we need to think about things in terms of technology, right? And so one of the ways in which he would do this is he was like, okay, let's not think about everything in terms of their actual object sense. Let's think about everything in terms of energy, both in terms of the energy that it costs to produce something, right? In this way, we could very clearly delineate a fair distribution of resources, because trying to use like what the communists did, prices, is just parasitic on markets, right? Which in their estimation is inefficient and unfairly distributes things. So instead, what we're going to do is we'll just do it on the total amount of energy it takes to produce things. Then we would use these denominated units of joules or ergs, right? Basically, how much energy it takes to produce something, and everybody would be giving a flat amount of this every single month for the value of the work that they did. This currency would eventually have an expiration date on it, and this was in the 30s. So he's
expiring currencies, yes.
Right.
But the first layer of tinfoil hat or head around your head, we'll add further layers as we go. Yeah, that's the first one.
Yep. So an expiring currency, which at that time would have been printed on paper, obviously, because it's the 30s. But the technocrats moved right along, and they eventually were excited about a digital currency, right? Because of course it doesn't require paper, and naturally this can be better manipulated. It ensures that people cannot hoard it, and more importantly, that nobody can counterfeit it. So you can exactly account for how much energy everybody is allowed to have. Right now, naturally, in a technocracy, one of the things that obviously they're really anti-hoarding, or anti people being able to.
Let's not use their own term. Let's call it's not hoarding. They're anti-saving.
Well, yes,
but they would say anti-hoarding, but they're anti-save. Yeah.
No, of course, right? Like naturally, this is my thing. But as
hoarding,
I guess it's good for you to jump in, because I'm trying to give the fairest shake for them that possibly could be.
You're being
because
too nice.
Of course,
you're being way too nice.
I am being too nice, right?
Yeah.
But essentially, like their notion is that, like, hey, if people were, so essentially one of the things that they would say is if people are able to restart a capitalist system, right, then they've essentially they're ruining a lot of things, right? Like, so for instance, if we find out that, like, say, there is a social ill that's going to ruin everybody's life, like, say, polluting or whatever, then we cannot appropriately disincentivize people in the softest way possible, which is through this credits, right? So we can't raise the price, say, of carbon emitting cars or whatever, or cars in general, right? Like, we can't make it sufficiently expensive for people to produce, right? So if they're able to save up and get outside the system and start using versions of currency that are not their version of currency, right?
Bottle caps?
The other
Nuka-Cola caps?
Another very interesting proposal for them that they came up with is the 4-day staggered work week, right? So the idea is that you would work 4 days. You'd
have people heard that one recently?
Yes. Again, I'm trying, since I'm laying it out, I'm trying not to be like bro every single, like, but I'll circle back around to it here in a second. I'm just laying out my case, right? Which is that we have the no, and you're good. It's totally fine for you to cut in there. But basically, their notion here is that what you would do is you'd have 7 groups of people. You would have, say, day 1 through 4, the first people work, right? And then the group second, their Monday, air quotes, would be the first group's second day, right? And so on and so forth. And then you have 4 days on, 3 days off, right? In a staggered environment. And some of the more radical proposals said that we would split up the day into 3 shifts, right? So that you would tile even the days, so that you would have continuous, always running production, right? Like essentially the factories would never close. And again, like some of the
never ending production. This has very, very strong Saruman vibe right there.
well, no, and it gets pretty wild. Like actually, now I'm remembering that one of the things that technocrats, one of the things that the technocrats proposed was a circular city with a large tower in the center where everybody would live in these like little villages, right? The middle tower would be kind of the factory that people would work in, right? And then the houses would be perfectly equally circled around the tower. So that way, there was minimal transportation needs, right?
Quick question. In this towered city, would they all speak the same language?
Probably, yeah, actually. I mean, like this was initially thought of to be US and Canada, so language wasn't really an issue.
No,
I don't
the tower about.
yeah. Oh yeah. You're right.
Yeah.
Right.
Also,
Yeah.
also a large tower, people.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Like it's it's some of these comparisons write themselves. Am I right or am I right? Anyway, so
Keep going.
no. So a lot of people would say that Singapore, a lot of the technocrats would say that Singapore is the best example of a technocracy currently in a world, which I would kind of disagree with, honestly. I'm not sure. It's interesting to note that many of the leaders of the Chinese Communist Party used to be professional engineers in their background. Just fun fact there. A lot of engineers happening in the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was actually they were really excited about their engineers and engineering type science folks. So there's quite a bit. There's quite a bit. It's like the Thabians laid out the approach, the technocrats laid out the how, right? So the Thabians laid out the what, the technocrats laid out the how, right? And the World Economic Forum is laying out the particular implementation policy. And if you look at Klaus Schwab, who is the head of the World Economic Forum guy, engineer, by the way, fun fact. He espouses a lot of, and the World Economic Forum also espouses a lot of the same policies that the technocrats and Thabians before them explicitly pushed for, right? So it's kind of like you hear all these conspiracy theories and you feel like, if you're kind of conspiratorial minded, like it's like, no, dude, like if you look at the lineage is freaking there, man. Like there's these guys called technocrats that came up with all these policy proposals, and there is an organization right now trying very hard to implement them in real time. And it's like, look, I don't think they're literally the same people, but bruh, I promise you they've read the same books, right?
Yep.
And yeah, go ahead. Good.
No, go ahead. I'm just agreeing. I'm enjoying it.
Oh yeah. Yep. So there's a lot more to be said about the technocrats, and like they're freaking, frankly, completely anti-human. It's funny because when you consider when you consider technocracy, you can understand that the communists think that capitalism is that, right? They think that when you hear them say capitalism, right, it's the capital acting, it's not the you acting, right? So in technocracy, right, a lot of people think about the technology acting, not the individual actors acting, right? And it's the same sort of thing. So you can kind of understand where the commies are coming from when they say, hey, the market system is this domineering entity, blah blah blah, all this stuff. Well, it's the same thing with us. We could see technology right now actively dominating our lives in a lot of crazy ways, and of course the technocrats were very pro social credit system before it was called social credit systems and all that stuff, right? Like, the more that you leaned into the technocratic life and produced valuable stuff as per their designs, the more social credit you would get, potentially, depending, you might get more credits, so to speak, more energy credits. And again, it's just so interesting that like, all of a sudden we're obsessed with energy. All of
Yep.
a sudden we're obsessed with the intersection of energy and technology and getting rid of any old technological system that would allow people for independence. It's just like, fast electric cars, like,
Or even just efficient energy production, like petroleum products.
Right, and so anyway, it's the point is in there's like this notion of like, I don't really care about the conspiracy theory mythology. It's just like, bruh, literally, I was not expecting to find an actual explicit political movement that was in lockstep with the WEF back in the 30s.
Well, and I mean, again, on this channel, we don't believe in allegory. We believe in myth. But at the same time, I think it's pretty safe to say that, to bring it back to Tolkien just a little bit, because it is sort of the framework.
Oh, well, we could definitely go back to Tolkien.
Yeah. Well, like, let's. So that's a really amazing sort of intro to technocracy there. As I keep saying, technocracy, more like techno crazy, right?
Okay. All right.
No?
We gotta calm down here.
No, okay.
No, that's great. No, I love it. That's actually pretty good.
The dad joke torch has been passed to me and my family, and I'm carrying it into the future. But yeah, like Tolkien is. I don't think Tolkien sat down and was like, I'm going to create prototypical technocrat character. I think what he's, at least from my interpretation of what, from what I've read from Tolkien about his, thoughts, his philosophy, but also just from like having read and thought a lot about the books. I think Saruman, again, Tolkien's very opposed to allegory 1-to-1, but he's very pro myth, which is like complex, right? And Saruman's a very complex character because he didn't start out bad. But there, what is it? The direct quote is going to escape me, so don't at me, anyone. Don't at me. When Treebeard, right, is talking about sort of like how in Two Towers, when the Treebeard bits that everyone hates, but the Treebeard bits are great. Treebeard's awesome. He was talking about to Merry and Pippin, how Saruman used to walk in my woods and then he stopped, and how his mind is full of gears. I think he says gears or something like that. That Saruman cares more about, or begins care, because he doesn't start out bad. He begins to care more about how things work, not out of a genuine curiosity or reverence for how things work. Things being like how the world works, right? But out of a real sort of like utilitarian kind of, and I mean in like the strict, like in the literal sense of like, how can I utilize this, right? If these two things produce a reaction, what can I use that reaction for? And obviously that's sort of just a standard way of existing for us in our world, and for many of the good characters in Lord of the Rings as well. But for Saruman, it becomes an obsession, and it becomes an obsession for getting power over others, really for the sake of power. There is a really kind of low effort Lulbert interpretation of Lord of the Rings, which says it's a, and I've heard this from libertarian Lulberts and from the post-libertarian crowd, both of whom I find sort of cringe. Just saying. That like, well, Lord of the Rings is about, people in the Lulberts will say it's about destroying power. And then the post-libertarians will be like, you can't destroy power. And I'm like, none of you are really reading these books. Like, you just don't care. Tolkien's not coming out against people using power. He's coming out against people using power for evil, right? It is ultimately a story of good versus evil, right? Power is like how you implement things. Could be good or bad. But Saruman becomes so obsessed with the implementation of the thing that he stops caring about whether it's good or bad. And then it becomes sort of, what do people say? It's a self-licking ice cream cone, right? Like it's just like, well, we just got to produce more. Why? Because we need more stuff. But why? So that we can have more power. Why? So we can produce more stuff. I've also heard kind of cringe commie takes on Lord of the Rings. It's a critique of global capitalism. I'm like, it's a critique of modernism. It's a critique of like the destruction of any kind of tradition. And I think that, you know, Saruman is not the big bad, right, in the story, but he's such a fascinating character, not just because of his fall into evil, but how it happens, right? His fall is not the same. It's a fall, but it's not the same kind of fall of like a character like Sauron or the real big bad, which hopefully at some point, if you're up for it, Elliot, we'll have a chance to get into when we crack open the Silmarillion, right? It's not Morgoth's fall. It's a technocratic fall. It's almost like, you know, Saruman spent way too much time on TikTok or something like that. He spent way too much time trying to become an Instagram influencer. And he just cares about, that's all he starts caring about is how can I'm being ridiculous, but you know what I mean? It's not just that the ends justify the means, it's like the means justify the end. It's all about the getting there. It's all just about what I can do, breaking things apart. And if you recall, I believe it's in Fellowship, right? When Gandalf is captured and then escapes on Gwaihir, remember the eagles? Why didn't they just take the eagles to Mordor? Shut up. You know what I mean? When Gandalf escapes and then he's back at Rivendell, right? And Frodo's like, I almost died and I have Morgul Blade and it hurts and I'm like effed up for the rest of my life now. Remember these bits? And Gandalf is like, the hobbit's like, tell us. And he's like, fine, okay, Council of Elrond, I'll tell you what happened, right? Gandalf comes to Isengard thinking, oh, it's my good old friend Sauron. Or not Sauron. I made the mistake. Saruman. I've had a horrible week. Don't at me. You know, it's my good old friend Saruman. And then Saruman, who used to be Saruman the White, right? And if you think of white light, it's just this white patriarchal male. He was the white in the sense of like light, right? Light coming together, like the white light that you see white. That's how he's presented himself. But all of a sudden, he starts looking different. His colors have shifted. And he's no longer the white. He's Saruman the like multicolored. Because what does a prism do? It breaks white light up into its constituent parts, but doesn't put them back together. That's not, I mean, like, it does not, you don't need to be the highest level Tolkien scholar, which I am not, by the way, to get what Tolkien's talking about here. Saruman is literally breaking light apart. One of the most basic fundamental, like, I guess you'd say, phenomena of like existence, right? Like the light is what we see, it bounces off objects, comes back into our eyes. He's breaking one of the fundamental energies of the world up into its constituent parts, right? And prisms are fun. I'm not saying little kids playing with prisms is like an evil thing, but the point is it's symbolic, right? It's mythological. He's breaking the white light that was once whole up into all kinds of colors, and they don't go back together. And I mean, this is also to sort of take Tolkien and place him, as we're doing. We're allowed to do this with love into our kind of, you know, our weird right framework. When you break something, it doesn't go back together, right? Like you can't unbreak the cup if you drop it. It falls and it breaks. Now it's just broken, right? You could glue it back together. You could do that like they do in Japan and really lovingly put it back together with a cool, you know what I'm talking about? I forget what it's called. They put the, you know, you repair things.
Yeah, they like repair it with like gold and stuff.
It's cool. Like you can repair things, and I'm not against, that's a good thing, but you can't like unbreak them, right? So this is it's an entropic act. You're like speeding up entropy. Saruman is speeding up entropy, which he's not supposed to do, right? The Istari, the wizards, spoiler, lots of spoilers, are not really human. Okay. They're like low-level Maiar, I believe. Yeah. So they're essentially like incarnate angels, if you will, something like incarnate spirit beings, something like that. Their job is to not do this, right? Their job is to actually turn the tide against evil, against destruction, against ruin. Okay, so against entropy. But Saruman gets so obsessed with how things work, and to be fair, he also, like, in his desire, maybe what started out as his genuine desire to combat evil, reads a lot about how evil works, specifically like how Sauron does Sauron's things, you know, how he forges rings, his plans, he gets a little too into learning how to combat the dark arts, to borrow a little bit of Harry Potter, that he just becomes another power, right? And he becomes another dark power. Is he as dark as Sauron? No, but I mean, but it's a huge betrayal, right? And it starts with this desire to break things apart, to see how they work. But it's kind of akin to like pulling the legs off of an insect and seeing how long it takes to die. Like, I guess you're learning things along the way, but it's dark and you're speeding up destruction along the way. And then you learn what you can do, and you spend so long doing what you can do that you stop thinking, or you spend so much time, figuring out what you can do, that you stop asking whether you should do it. And obviously this is Tolkien hits you on the head with this in the character of Saruman, but that is a technocratic idea. So I'm not saying that Tolkien had technocracy in his mind. What I'm saying is he was critiquing the same kind of mindset that technocracy runs on, which is essentially like, how can we treat the world like a wind-up toy? And how can we treat things as mechanical? How can we treat humans as mechanical? How can we treat the natural world as mechanical? How can we treat everything as just to get a little Kantian, means to an end? And then how can we make the means the end? It goes one step further. So anyhow, you talk, but that's I think that's the strongest connection I see between technocracy and Saruman. So.
Well, and I would say, in a certain way, I think the Maiar not the Maiar, the wizards that we're given. I kind of think about them sort of like prophets in one sense, right? Where they're the kind of bridge between the divine and the mundane.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. So Tolkien being brilliant doesn't just say, hey, because you read in the Bible about a lot of false prophets, but you never really hear from any. So it doesn't give you a really solid idea of they're like, beware of false prophets, don't listen to them. And you're like, yeah, but what do they sound like?
Right.
Like, the only prophets I know, it's like, as long as you sound like a biblical prophet, you're good to me, because I don't know what a false prophet sounds like, right? So this actually allows for false prophets very easy access into our society, right? And this is how we get scammed so easily, right? So Tolkien, really, again, being a genius over here, gives us 5 fantastic examples of prophets, only one of which actually works out, right? All of which get in some way or the other caught up in the material universe, right? Like Radagast gets caught up in nature and just being tripped out by nature, and like, holy shit, this universe is really beautiful, and kind of like it in a abstracted way, right? Just sort of taking it in, right? Like he got in the terms of the cybernetic entity, right? He got too caught up in the inputting, right? I think the wizards in blue, which we don't really know anything about, from what I understand. But they got taken off in the East, and there's some speculation that maybe they started some cults of magic. So in that way, they would have got caught up in the output of the nature, right? And Saruman got caught up in the cybernetic aspect of the nature, right? He got caught up in the like, well, what if, right? The what if, that kind of thing. And Gandalf's the only person that like actually implements, right, the input decision output situation correctly. Right?
Well, and as many people have pointed out, it is also like it's the whammy dog meme, womp womp. It's like, Tolkien, like, womp, in case you didn't realize, right?
You're right, but it's not.
Gandalf is a Christ figure. He's not but he's a Christ figure. He's simultaneously divine and incorporeal, let's say incarnate, corporeal, something like, however you want to view that. He's definitely not a perfect, like in Christian theology, Christ figure, right? He's grumpy, he gets grumpy, he's not perfect, right? He has his flaws, clearly.
Well, Christ do be whipping bankers and shit.
This is anyway. True, but I somehow, but like, yes, but I still think, I mean, he's I would not call Gandalf fallen, but he's more flawed then, right? He's a flawed,
Mhm.
well-intentioned,
Yes.
incarnate being, which is not the same thing as Christ in Christian theology, but it
Right.
doesn't have to be, because it's a myth, folks. It's not
Yeah.
Narnia, it's Lord of the Rings. It's a myth. It's okay. It's more complex than this. You can
Yeah. He is not Aslan.
it's not
Okay.
equals signed. Yeah, let's not do that. But Gandalf, in this Christ-like way, bridges the sort of, he has the input output of creation more or less harmonized, more or less, right? More or less. And he does come back from the dead, by the way, in case there's the whammy of it, in case you didn't realize. Guys come back, okay. But he balances like the spiritual and the physical, right? He does not, he still is an enfleshed bodily creature, but he sort of is perpetually aged, always a little old. If people have recall last week's Tom Bombadil explanation with Wainamoinen from Finnish mythology, I can't help but think of some Wainamoinen. I know a lot of people talk about, a lot of Gandalf is Odin. That is true. There's a lot of Odinic. There's an heavily Odinic quality to Gandalf. There's also some Wainamoinen in there as well. He of all the wizards, he's the most balanced in the sense of like doing what he should be doing, as you just pointed out. The other ones veer off in these directions, but there's this sort of earth divine synthesis happening in Gandalf. And Gandalf becomes what Saruman should have been, right? He becomes Gandalf.
Right. Because Saruman was the leader. And the reason why I say that Saruman get caught.
Almost like the new Adam, anyone. Okay, so it's clear that Tolkien's very Catholic here. It's like, okay, yeah. Yeah. So
But that's why I say Saruman got caught up in the decision making part of it, right? Because he was the leader of the one, right? Yeah, the tinkering, right? Like he was the leader, right? And he was supposed to lead the guys, and he caught up in the sort of geopolitics, and so it was Gandalf the Grey, and then it became Gandalf the White after Saruman gave up his Saruman the White into Saruman of many colors, right? And I think it is important to point out his analytic framework did end up breaking down and fracturing the world from itself. Like literally, like I can't remember if this is really in the books, right? But Treebeard goes on and gripes for an awful long time about how he's fucking up the nature everywhere. And
that's in the books. It's actually more in the books than it is in the movies. Yeah, you get
great.
A lot more. Again, I am very pro Treebeard. So
no, Treebeard's dope.
Treebeard's
like fucking
cool.
That guy. Yeah. Treebeard is talking about like, dude, I used to go in the Isengard were the best ever, right? And I think it, as an occultist, I will say that any occultist who is worth their salt and isn't just trying to use you will say, hey, if you embark on a mystical or occult path, you better be pretty damn well grounded, right? Because you will get lost instantly in a lot of nonsense if you don't. And that's true for a lot of occult stuff too. That's true for postmodernism, right? And postmodernism is not necessarily a cult for all of you Christian people who are scared of occult stuff. It's like no, like postmodernism, but it's not very grounding. It will leave you lost. Actually, a lot of modernist or modern philosophy will just trap you in an infinite cacophony, purposefully used cacophony of fucking ideas, right? You will live in a world of pure imagination, and you might never find your way out of it.
Get it wrong. In a world of pure ideology. Yeah, anyhow. Our boy Slavoj.
If Zizek was Willy Wonka, the girl.
Come with me. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
She eats the gum, and this is a profound act. She balloons.
Yep. I want that movie. Somebody do an AI art of Slavoj Zizek as fucking Willy Wonka. Yes, I'll pay you. Yeah, no, but that's the world of pure ideas is kind of a wonderful world, but it's a dangerous world. And not just because of the ideas themselves, but like you said, this untethering to it. It's
because all of a sudden that's how you get orcs, right? You're like,
yeah.
because
Do you want
and this is the
orcs?
important thing.
Because
This
that's
is
how
how
you
you
get
get
orcs.
orcs.
Yes.
Literally, he is
Yeah.
manufacturing life, right? And not
But
just like in
he's
the, but
also mixing. He's also, I mean, he's making, so what the right what the what Morgoth did to the elves to produce the orcs. Although yes, I know Tolkien tried to go in and retcon that later, but okay, yeah, yeah, it was an ongoing production of the mythology. So not everything about the his mythology is completely set, and he changed his mind over time. But it sort of the version that got put into the books, right? Let's say, is that right? The elves, who are the firstborn of Eru Ilúvatar, were corrupted to become orcs. And that was sort of the first big wound, right? Let's say. Then what Saruman does is he takes orcs and mixes them with humans. Sort of like another yet smaller but still very egregious wound to Eru Ilúvatar's creation. So there's this like Saruman is always playing second fiddle to Sauron and Sauron's boss, by the way. But despite, okay, so you can say, well, Saruman's not the biggest bad. I'm like, yeah, but he's still like, in some, the fact that he started out, well, I guess they all started out good, but like that his explicit mission was to go in and stop or push back against the forces of darkness. He's just participating with them, but he's not even doing a great job of it, right? I mean, yes, the Uruk-hai are wonderful, I guess, in a way. They're really effective fighting force, but like they're clearly like just, he's like, well, how do we get the orcs to be able to run full speed in the daytime? I know, let's mix them with men, right? So you have this like strange, almost like Island of Dr. Moreau, like Frankenstein quality of like, ha 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 ha, lightning crashes. I will combine, right? I will recombine. It's a very kind of Fox move if you think about it. Like I will recombine these things in this new way because I can take things apart and put them back however I want to. Right? It doesn't matter what they were intended for. It doesn't, none of that matters. We're all infinitely recombinable and infinitely recreatable, and we all create ourselves, don't we? Yeah. So even in Saruman's fucking around with the with the orcs, like he somehow takes the orcs and makes them even more hideous, like these already hideous creatures. He like makes them fall more somehow. Yeah, sorry, keep talking, but it's just it like he injury upon injury, something like that, or insult upon insult, something like that. It's, yeah, it's something that technocrats are all about, right? We just need to kind of remake, like you said, even weird things like the work week. We'll remake the work week. There won't be set, we'll all just be on a rotating cycle, just it all seamlessly working together.
And that really is like, I mean, and this isn't the first round of this sort um of this uh uh breaking down of everything into its most atomistic, most fundamental parts, and then trying to recombine them in ways that are then filtered through your ideal system, right? So it's sort of like a, how can we cause the ideal system that we want? We need to break everything down into its smallest constituent parts. Then we understand how to build things, and we'll reform it into a new way that is totally grotesque, relatively
Yeah,
speaking. And the French tried to do this too post the Napoleonic era, right?
yeah.
They were had a
Was it the 10-day week?
Yeah, they was super hard on for 10. And that's where
Yeah,
like the metric system comes from. And honestly, for length, it kind of makes sense. But a 10-day week was a bit awkward. I mean, honestly, like this is probably the best example of technocrats not really being able to be reconciled perfectly with nature, right? It's a beautiful example of like, yeah, you cannot chop up the calendar correctly. It's always going to have a little bit
yeah,
of ugliness to it, and in a way that's beautiful, right?
it
Like
is. Yeah,
there's only a couple of bad solutions. You can have an occasional month, you can have an occasional day, you can have a fully circular calendar, like Aztec Mayan think, right? Where there really is no, we don't care that there has to be 12 months. We're just, continuing to more or less enumerate the days in increasingly large number systems, right? So there's a sort of day cycle with, let's forget the year. You could focus on a lunar cycle. Like all of these things kind of like you know give us different ways of looking at the universe, which is beautiful. But this notion of like, okay, 10 is the magic number, right? And by the way, it's not even a good magic number anyway. 12 is the better magic number, but regardless, I'll leave that math nerd point aside. Of like, for whatever reason, like technocrats can't even pick the most beautiful abstraction to idealize and try to implement. They have to pick a really stupid,
beautiful, but there's no beauty,
10.
has nothing to do with it, right? Beauty is
No, of course not.
right.
It's sort of, it's not even all that practical for practical's sake. It's this weird idealistic practicality, right? It's
Yeah.
kind of funny because idealists you say damn practicality, and then we'll say, well, your solution that is more beautiful than mine isn't very practical. And I say, but dude, we wouldn't have even touched ideology if we were being practical. Right?
Right.
Like, what about the ideal system or ideas, right? Or this really abstractions that are fantasies that we project, out onto the heavens, right? Not even like from the heavens, but out onto the heavens, right? Could we
It's
do
like
in
as below, so above kind of model.
a little bit, right? So, and here, Colin and I, by the way, we've got little digs. I got a Reformation dig in earlier, so
I somehow missed the. It shows you how tired I am from this hell week. I missed the Reformation dig, but yeah, no, I gotta dig. I gotta keep your kind in check.
exactly.
Weirdos.
So,
Hey, you know what? When you figure out how to turn lead into gold, you let me know. Okay, that's just
yeah,
let me. Okay.
right. So the Saruman, and it's interesting, right? Because he eventually says, "Hey, we need to give up and get with the program of evil," right? Because he says this to Gandalf. I can't quite remember. Do you remember better his line there?
I mean, it's no. I mean, I'm always bad with those quotes, but I mean, he's essentially saying like we have no choice now. We just have to join with Sauron. Like this is the option. Otherwise, we will be ground. Like we could sort of serve him, and maybe he'll let us have something in his new reign. Which is such a fucking beta male take, right? It's so weak, right? For somebody who has so much power at his fingertips, right? Saruman has great power and great wisdom at his fingertips, but it's still such a weak, like a spiritually weak stance. It's a kind of a weird reversal, I think, of Milton, right? Like it's almost like Saruman would rather he'd rather just serve in hell than serve in heaven, and you're like, what? And that's kind of Gandalf. Like, you'd rather just, like, it's not even a question of ruling. It's like you'd rather just serve
serve in hell because it's easier to get into hell.
Oh yeah, something like that. Or it's
right.
or maybe not even it's easier, but it's also just like that's his frame of reference. Is like, well, my machinations, which are very they're
machinations.
They're machinations.
Mm-hmm.
My machinations, Sauron's machinations are so much worse than mine, but at least they're machinations, and that's something I know. But what's this beauty of the Symphony of Arrow of Iluvatar? That doesn't make sense, quote unquote. I don't really get that. So why? Yeah, it's a really weak. It's a spiritually weak response, but it's also a response that's very human. And so even though in Tolkien's world, right, the wizards aren't technically human, but they have a lot of human qualities to them, right? And the temptation there to do what is expedient. Not even because it's here, but because it just makes more sense, but it makes sense in a very flawed human way. It is a very faithless kind of response because it does not, there is no leaping into something bigger than yourself, right? It is just like, well, this is what I understand the machine, and look at that guy has bigger machines. Let's just do that.
Well, and I think it's right, like, so this notion of abstraction, right, or sorry, not abstraction, but
Particular.
of analysis,
Oh.
right, particularizing, right. So I'm pro analysis, obviously, in general, right, but it has its limits in some ways, and of course one can like obsessively analyze in ways that are not very fruitful. So
Analysis? More like anal lysis. Ew.
um, if you were to say take the alto part in a 4-part harmony, right, and you just listen to the alto part, you'd be like, man, this is super boring, right? Or if you listen to the tenor part, you'd be like, wow, this is all over the place and sounds like a mad person wrote this, right? Or if you took the bass part and you're like, wow, this is what's going on here. Yeah, none of it makes sense until you not just listen to the melody, but you combine them all together. You cannot separate each part from themselves. Maybe you could separate the melody, right? But clearly that was enough for Arrow and Luvitar. He wanted the harmoniousness, right? The harmonies. And so I could imagine Saruman reminds me of the type of person who would go and basically say, hey, I heard the alto part and that's ugly and therefore God is wrong, right? Or
You've made
but it's like, dude, listen to the whole fucking song, dumbass.
yeah, no, it's about the whole song, but then I mean, I think the clarifying point here is that the idea is that you can't listen to you can't hear the whole symphony yet.
Yes, exactly.
So maybe sometimes you get glimpses, you hear snippets of it and it's super pretty, but you're not going to get all of it yet. But you are needed in that symphony, not because because Tolkien's very Catholic here. You're needed in the symphony, not because Eru Ilúvatar needed you. It's because Eru Ilúvatar created you to be part of a symphony. And so like this is what you're created for. And so it's about doing your part, which does not mean trying to start a new symphony, right? It's like not required. So it's this interesting thing about like, right, this is in many ways an episode about evil, I guess, because technocracy is evil, by the way, kids, it's evil. But on a
do not try at home.
It's an example of evil, right? Because it's a hollow system. And we've talked a lot about how for Tolkien, right, evil is a hollow bent void. It's good that has been eaten from the inside out somehow, and that's really what happens to Saruman, right? He hollows himself out, if you will, and then vanishes right when he's killed into dust, basically. But yeah, I mean the purpose is not so much it's not that you can't make beautiful things, it's that you make beautiful things that, like, again, we keep saying it, harmonize with the broader symphony that's going on, right? And I don't know if this is going to get perhaps a little live, laugh, love for you, Elliot, but it's fine. When you're creative, at least for me, maybe you get this with math. I'm so not a math person, so numbers don't produce this feeling with me, although I would imagine they do for somebody who's really passionate about them. But like when I hear a new language that I've never heard before, there's something, it's cool because you're not even focusing on what it means, right? You're like, I don't even know what these words mean, but you just actually hear like the language as like people having a conversation at a restaurant. And you're like, wow, what language is that, right? It's so cool because I'm a language person. But I'm not worried about the meaning or the grammar, right? I'm not taking it apart. I'm just experiencing it. And obviously I have filled with great curiosity and would love to learn the language. And there's nothing wrong with learning languages, obviously. But there's this kind of the joy of the experiencing it that that you really don't get when you're editing a 200-page, you're doing a grammar edit on a 200-page work in a language you already know. Well, then you're like, oh, this is just horrible. This is just, it's stressful and it's a job or right. I'm talking about specifically like my dissertation, right? It was not fun because I'm ripping it apart to try to fix the problems in it so I can get through the PhD program. So one of the more traumatic experiences of my life was just editing my dissertation. Also because I had to read what I wrote and I'm like, oh God. It's fine. I passed. That's all that matters. But my point is, I was using language, right? And I was actually doing something kind of cool that like no other species that we know of in the planet can do. And it's and somebody who doesn't know English, who has the same appreciation for English, will probably go, wow, this is just kind of like pretty. But I wasn't viewing it that sense, right? Because I was viewing it purely from a very hyper mechanical standpoint. And that's one of the reasons why like I love to, again, also super live, laugh, love, but that's fine. I love just hanging out. Like I love hanging out in places where I don't speak the language. As much as I love to learn a language, it's also kind of nice to just be thrown into a place where you have no idea, or to talk with people, to have to interact with people you have no idea what they're saying. They don't understand you, but you still find this way to, on a very basic level, kind of make it work. And it's kind of pretty because it's just you're like, it's an intuitive feel. You're feeling language as opposed to talking about the morphosyntax of Old Norse, which is not right on a hyperclinical level. Is almost like surgically taking something apart, as opposed to being like, I don't want to do like an autopsy or God forbid a vivisection, right? I just want to see the animal move. Like, how does it move? And you see like a bird flying, like that's pretty. You hear a language you don't know, and you're like, that's pretty. I think Gandalf, I guess my point is Gandalf manages to kind of keep the analytic, and again, we're not, obviously, as Elliott said, we're not anti-analytic here. He keeps like the intellectual analytic part, but also like the sense of the harmony of the music of the symphony that's going on in the background. Saruman loses the symphony completely, and he, again, very similar but on a much smaller level than the big bad in the world, Morgoth, wants to start making his own kind of music, but it's like mumble rap or something horrid. Just it's bad. And of course, this, with mumble rap you get Lil Pump, and with technocracy you get Saruman. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So you kind of get Gucci Gang.
I would say that like it's very similar for me in math, right? So I was just actually reading a paper where one of the joys when you're a math person is like you see a paper, right? And it's largely just nonsense, but you're like, man, those symbols look real cool. And I bet you there's a really beautiful pattern underneath all of these symbols, right? And so then basically your job as a math paper is to go and understand what all those symbols mean individually, and then start slowly recombining them up. And at some point, you've got a string of symbols that relates to that string of symbols. And this is a very low level approach to it, obviously, right? Like really what you're doing is you're building back these concepts together, and like, how they relate to each other and what they mean, right? And then you read the paper, and before you had the jumble of symbols that was kind of that was shallow, right? Like you were just like dazzled by the surface appearance of it. And then after you analyze it and then you recombine it, right? And the analysis happens entirely with you. And this is the important thing. You're not taking apart the paper, you're taking apart your sort of you're sort of dying, right? You're taking apart yourself and reconfiguring yourself in a way in which you can actually engage with the paper. And then all of a sudden, boom, you are now changed. You're reading the paper as a new person, and the paper is singing to you because you're like, holy shit, this is the most beautiful shit I've ever seen. And I imagine there's very similar languages, right?
Yeah, well, I was just gonna say, as much as I love the just encountering a language, right, and not having any idea, I actually really enjoy that. I actually some linguists I know, not Mitch is one of the good ones. We love you, Mitch. But some linguists are like, isn't it just so frustrating to like you just want to rip it apart? I'm like, well, I want to learn it, but I want to just hear it first, right? But then when you dive into a language and you learn a language, it's super hard. It's super hard to learn any foreign language. It's just really difficult. And it's just something that a lot of people in America don't do, which is a shame, because it's actually a great experience, because there's nothing like you start out and it's all just like foreign sounds. Like you just say, I don't know. But it is crazy how quickly, if you really apply yourself to it, particularly if you are lucky enough to be able to go to a country or find people who are just speaking the language you're trying to learn, it's crazy how quickly you can learn it, even just at a basic level. Maybe not so, you learn to understand it before you ever learn to speak it, this kind of stuff. But then to be able to, okay, don't want to toot my own horn too much, but like like the other day I was reading some for an upcoming article on Carpe Forum, reading some German political philosophy, which is like, and poor Elliott had to hear me like sending him screenshots with translations because it was just so cool and profound. And it kind of just is like,
sometimes with the translations, not all the time.
yeah,
But
well,
I
I'm
was
like,
like,
Elliott,
okay,
don't
cool.
you understand German? Come on, what's wrong with you?
Like I could read some of these nouns.
Yeah, none of those words are in the Bible. Yeah, but it's like this. Because for me at least, having done the languages I work with for so long, it's kind of normal. It's just kind of normal to be able to read them, and then you sit back and go like, wait a second, like I'm reading this work in its original language, and the nuance you get from reading something not in a translation, but just actually being able to sort of hit the source ad fontes is kind of amazing. And so there's little moments where you're like, this is really cool. This is awesome. And, like you compare it maybe to like the English translation and you're like, oh, they've just, they did a good job with the translation, but it's nothing like the original. It's just nothing like the original. There's just something about that. So yeah, I even though I'm so not a math person, I know what you mean about that. Like the you start out not knowing a language, and then you get to the point where you can just do crazy amounts of stuff in it, and it becomes normal. But you have to remind yourself, like, remember when before you spoke this language, what was that like? And you're like, I don't even remember what that was like. I kind of remember what it was like before I could speak German, but it's so much of like just a thing I do now. And it's a thing I love, right? And I have like friends, I have whole friendships that I've like established in German. And you're like, that's neat. I don't know. It's you become, like you become a different person. So I get what you mean, even though math still I contend is a scary thing. I don't
No,
know.
it is scary. Well, no, math is a harsh mistress. Like
Yeah.
they say that math is less of a there's mathematicians are the type of person that is like that math will kick him in the face and like, yeah, please, can I have another? Like it's
Yeah, that's language is a similar kind of thing. You're like, please note all the irregular verbs and see, and like when you're starting out with language, you're like, oh fuck my life, and you hate it, right? And so then when you're more advanced in language learning, you go, oh fuck my life, that's beautiful. You're like, please note the following irregular verbs. So cool, so hard. I hate it, but I love it at the same time, right? I don't know if that's just masochism or what, but yeah, I know what you mean. Anyhow, we're patting each other so hard on the back here. People are tuning out, but yeah, no. I guess how does this connect to Saruman and technocracy? This joy that Elliott and I are talking about in the analysis. That's not there is no joy, right, in Saruman's analysis. It is not about discovering the beauty of creation. It's not about discovering the beauty of language, of tradition, of culture, of history, of science. It's music. It's not about that. It's just about like, I need to make more orcs and more just to kill things because I
well,
need to.
and he's the guy that you were mentioning earlier, right? Like who hears the language and says, "Oh my goodness, what ugliness! I need to change this language."
Yeah.
That's Saruman, right? Yeah. He's like, "Whoa, the goodness of the world is such a pain in the butt. We should just,
it's so complex. That Elvish, it's got too many irregular verb forms. Let's just like, yeah,
let's simplify it.
Weird. Takes too long to learn. The script is too fluid. No, yeah, it's not efficient.
It's like there's a difference between analysis for the sake of reduction, right, and analysis for the sake of appreciation, and then recreation.
Yeah, like, well,
right?
and this is and as Tolkien would say, subcreation, right? And so for Tolkien, one of the most pure forms, I would say, I think I'm accurately representing his philosophy here, having read quite a bit of it. Somebody will doubtless disagree with me. That's fine. It's encouraged. I think for Tolkien, one of the purest forms of experiencing subcreation, which for him means like as a created being, you then create things because you were created by a creator. So it's this like chain of being, tree of being. One of the purest forms of sort of like tapping into kind of the stuff of life, as I like to say, is to create your own language. And obviously that's where these stories come from. They come from Tolkien having started to work on Elvish and then quickly realizing, well, it makes no sense to have Elvish if there's not elves. What's their story? And so yeah, but like for Tolkien, the love of the learning of the languages and the appreciation of the languages is amazing, and then taking it and doing your own active sub-creation with it is even cooler. So yeah, and that love and the joy of that is, I mean, that's another thing you get throughout all of Tolkien's works. Is just like the I mean, again, everyone complained there's so many poems and so many songs. I'm like, well, yeah, but he's like creating an entire world that has like centuries old, millennia old traditions, that all come out of this, like, what do the elves speak kind of question. So that's the, like, the inception point of all of this. So I don't know, like that's the pure, like that's the pure hit, right, of the creative genius, at least for Tolkien, right? And I don't think he would say that, like, he wasn't like he was clearly anti-fascist, but in the truest sense, he wasn't, you know, he wasn't saying that was true for everyone, but it was clearly true for him. Because why else would you spend the better part of your life working on building a world like this if you weren't deriving some sincere, like, beauty out of it? Which is right, which is completely the opposite of what Saruman is doing. Saruman doesn't care about beauty. He used to, but then he gives up, right? It's not about, trees are pointless. Why have trees? Right? Why care for the trees? Why do we even have Ents? What do we need Ents for? Right? The forest is just taking up space. It's completely impractical.
It's getting in the way of production, right?
Yeah.
Of pure production,
Yeah.
right?
Just like
And
somebody,
that's sort of,
why do you need a family? That's ridiculous. Why do you need
and,
a 7-day, 5-day work week with a weekend? That's ridiculous. Why do you even have a set day that you hold as something different? That's ridiculous. It's outdated. There's no reason for that.
why do you have like traditions that hold you that just unify everybody, right? That are held in common by no, yeah, for sure, and of course, why aren't you producing for the sake of production, which is what the technocrat is about, right? Like that's that's the ultimate thing of like you literally lose the forest for the trees in that way,
Like,
right?
literally. Yeah, you literally do that. But, but there's also, let's maybe a way to start turning for home is to talk about, like, sort of like the warning, right? Good myths there's a warning in a lot of them, right? Not always, but there's some lessons, let's say. Warnings may be a bit harsh, but it's a warning here. I think there's some lessons. Like what ultimately happens, right, in the end. But we've already covered that on the show because we go out of order because we're fighting a time war. But right, it does not, it goes horribly for everyone, but also for Saruman. Like, it's not like he emerges victorious. I mean, he emerges completely broken and such a shadow of his former self that he's unrecognizable. So
With some very petty and not even long lasting vengeance to his name, right?
yeah,
Like the scouring of the Shire was a total
yeah, he's
it was
so
a
reduced.
complete
Yes,
loss.
love hobbits. I love the hobbits and I know them, they're great people. But let's be honest, the hobbits are not like the most martial of peoples. Like, we subjugated hobbits, you're like, wow, that was what you were reduced to, is subjugating hobbits.
And
Like,
honestly, they're going to
it's
tell
so
this
sad.
story as a positive thing, right? Like it's going to be scary for a second, and then it's going to be like, and then we won. So like the lasting outcome is that he gave the hobbits another great victory.
I mean, he did some damage along the way, but yeah, I mean, but and I don't think, I like to think at least Frodo was not happy about having to fight yet another battle, but right when he was already tuckered out. But yeah, yeah, right. But in the truest spirit of everything gets wrapped backed up into that great, symphony of Ero Iluvatar, it gives the hobbits, I mean, man, as we've talked about, man, do they kick ass. So it's like, that's what and that's the hollowness of evil, right? Is that it's so bent and twisted around that, yeah, I mean, it sucks things into its wake, its gravity well, if you will, which is bad and horrific, but it's also just like, it's spiraling out, right? It's unraveling. And it is horrific, but in some ways it's also preposterous, like that evil is even there, right? That I think that's part of, like, any good investigation, I guess, or deliberation on theodicy, right? Then like the problem of evil is that there's this I don't want to say funny because it's not funny, but there's this like preposterous quality to it. You're like, it's clearly real, but how is this real, right? Then this is most human myths, at least the good ones, attempt to answer that somehow. Like, why is it this way, right? Like, why is it that we're born, live lives that are less than ideal, and then we die like that? Why is that? There's something ridiculous about that. So, yeah, but and Saruman embraces that wholeheartedly, and then just is this like complete ridiculous character at the end. The dude who commanded like thousands of legions of orcs just is like this. he's getting stabbed from behind by his lackey. It's like, wow. And obviously I know that in the quote unquote real world, the bad guys oftentimes do win, right? And it doesn't turn out that way, but that's okay because it's a myth, right? It's designed to, it's not a one-to-one. It's designed to teach us something. It teaches many things.
Well, and of course the real problem is that even within Lord of the Rings, the pre-modernism doesn't win, right?
Right.
In so far as like the age of magic gives way to the age of man, right? And the age of man is more technology driven.
Yeah.
Than
by necessity, because they're mortal.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and they will die. And they know that, so they have limited time, higher time preference. They have to use more technology. They can't just wait, right? The elves can wait for trees to grow how they want them to grow, right? The kingdoms of man have to like build giant cities, right? Like behind me. So, but yeah, Technocracy. Don't try it at home. Very bad. Would not recommend. Not only,
and it's scarier than you think.
It is a lot scary, and it's so much more insidious, right? Because Saruman, it was like by step by step, by little step by little step by little step. And you get the sense that even at the end, Saruman felt completely justified the whole time. The self-justification, the self-delusion, all that, whatever you want to call that, was just so strong. Never stopping back to ask, wait, like, should I be doing, is this the right thing? No self-reflection at all. Because I mean, maybe that has to do with it. Self-reflection is perhaps a poetic action. To be able to reflect upon what you're doing I think it requires a little bit of poetry, maybe a little bit of cosmic poetry. And Saruman gave up on the cosmic poetry, right, a while back, and just started caring about what was right in front of him because it was more quote unquote practical. So beware of that, I guess, too, right? Don't give up on the things that produce joy, things that produce wonder. Don't go so, I think that's maybe this is also one of the warnings here, is right, don't get so wrapped up into the everyday. It does matter, but if you get so wrapped up into it that you stop wondering, asking bigger questions, particularly the questions that don't have answers, those are the good questions, or don't have easy answers at least. Look at what can happen to you, and it does happen to people, right? Hopefully not in such a profound way as Saruman. Hopefully you don't find yourself leading legions of orcs. We hope, but it can, I got stories from stuff from my life, periods of my life where I'm like, yeah, I really got wrapped up into that. That wasn't good, but also just like other people, I think most people have stories about this where you get wrapped up into something, or somebody gets wrapped up into something that they never really stopped, and if they just stopped and thought about it for like a minute, they probably would have reconsidered. But there was it was what was expedient and what was in front of you and what was quote practical. So I guess in some ways, I like to think of myself as a pretty practical, pragmatic person, but there's something to be said for being complex, right? And in, like we said, with even just the Elvish language, loving the complexity of ridiculously hard but beautiful things. And not trying to be the master of them, right? Because the great musicians are not masters of the music, right? They're literally harmonizing with the music. They're letting the music flow through them, and it's all very cliche, but it is true. Don't
well, and the people who are actually masters of a craft, right? They haven't Well, it's like this. It's like this. You know, we were a friend of mine and I were meditating on what it means to be to practice, right? And for whatever reason, when it comes to art or creation or production, everybody kind of thinks that practice is a drudgery.
Right.
It's the thing that you do before you get the thing you want. But it's like, okay, but in, you know, in engineering and medicine and law, you only practice. Oh yeah, I practice medicine. Well, obviously, like that's a lot of different things. And for a doctor, well, not a modern doctor, obviously not a technocrat doctor, but like a proper doctor, right? Like there's many aspects that go into that practice that aren't just reading medical journals or diagnosing patients. Like, could you imagine if you know the everybody thought the only part of lawyering was, and actually probably people do, but the only part of lawyering was getting up and giving impassioned speeches to
Yeah.
juries. It's like, no, dude, like a huge part of law is poring over hella boring documents to find the one little thing to fuck the other guy over with, right?
Yeah.
Or, you know, reading the law, or like, you know, proverbially speaking, holding somebody's hand as they cry because
Right.
they're in a super stressful point in their life, right? And all of these things are part of practicing law. Well, part of practicing creation is learning how to use a paintbrush and painting shitty paintings over and over and over and over and over again. Same thing with choir or music. It's like doing a scale or doing vocal warm-ups or like breathing or, you know, exercising even, right? Like all of these things go into practicing to be excellent, right? And the people who are focused on the practice and improving their practice, those people are the ones that become excellent musicians and artists and poets and whatever, right? And that's the trick. It's like if you try to take a shortcut to the great
Yeah.
thing,
There's
to
no
the
shortcut.
creation, there's no shortcut, right? And you end up ruining the end product. And that's essentially what Saruman did,
Yeah.
right? Is he was trying to find the shortcut and he ended up fucking everything up instead.
Yeah. Yeah. There's often there, you know, shortcuts are not usually the best. I mean, this is also, everyone knows this from every single horror movie, right? Like the shortcut is not the way to go. Don't do it. Yeah. Oh, but we'll do it. It'll be fine this time. Well, maybe it is fine that time, but is it fine every time? Right? Does it always not? Can you always get by? Beware. Yeah, I think that's a good place to end it. Elliot, do you have any final thoughts on Saruman Technocracy?
No, I'm good for now.
Yeah, thank you for, I know that you were excited about this, so thank you for yeah, Technocracy is unfortunately kind of a thing. More it's become even more of a thing, right? Probably because technology.
Well, and the reason why, again, like one of the, and this is just coming to me, so sorry about that,
Oh, go
but
ahead.
one of the reasons why it's so, I feel like Tolkien is a direct response to technocracy, because as soon as I like, you know, as soon as we were talking about Lord of the Rings and we talked about, actually, I think this whole thing got caught up by offhandedly calling Saruman a technocrat, right? And then
Yeah.
we were like, well, hold on, what else do we have, right? And some of these other ideas got spun out, but basically, um, you know, Tolkien would have been writing the Lord of the Rings at literally the same time. The first book on technocracy came out in 1919. Like
Yeah.
literally, these ideas dualistically occurred at the same time of, hey, we should scale back on the technocratic instinct. Hey, we should accelerate the technocratic instinct.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a really good point. So it's definitely, I think it's safe to say it's in the water. It's in the air during his
Yeah,
life.
the question is at hand.
Yeah. And it's still at hand. And again, I know obviously very biased, but I think that like that's why I really do contend that Lord of the Rings, you know, it's awesome to read them in the context of when they're written. It's also awesome to read them in the now context, because
Mm-hmm.
sadly it's still, if anything, it's almost more pertinent. Like maybe because we've been so lulled into thinking that there's an end of history and that things will resolve themselves. I'm like, I don't know, man. I don't think that's how that works. You know, please consider what these ideas. And it is also cool, but also depressing to see how, not that Tolkien's ideas are perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I think they there's some good stuff in there. Just to see how despite the being one of the most beloved fandoms, a multi-generational fandom, as you pointed out, I think last time, how contrary to the the TikTok crap Tolkien's ideas are, like so contrary to the major cultural narratives of our time. It's it is, I guess, in that sense, reactionary, or it's just contrary. It's maybe just contrary. It's subversive. Let's say, how about that? It's a subversive ideology. It's subversive to be a hobbit, which is something like saying it's subversive to be a normal person. Something to consider.
It is though.
It is though. It really is. It really is.
I was reading some freaking. Well, anyway, we'll talk about that offline.
We'll talk about it. Yeah. Anyhow, thanks again to everyone who's watched this long. I know we kind of ramble. Apologies. It's just been a hell of a week, and Tolkien's a good escape, a healthy escape from, just the technocracy that we're living under. Please like, comment, subscribe. Those things are helpful. Yeah, more to come. We're doing some more. We're at some more Lord of the Rings stuff that in the works. I'm also trying to get Elliott to do some Kipling with me as well. Kipling's really cool, and I like Kipling a lot. And just some other stuff, jumping around a bit. It's Lord of the Rings will continue to happen, but with some new stuff interspersed. We're also trying to get Kyle back on. It's been very busy for everyone. For more Warhammer. So we're not stopping those things. It's just if
our only popular episodes.
And I contend that as long as people would stop stealing my car and things like that, I would be able to be more productive. So yeah, don't steal cars, and be good neighbors, and yeah, I'll see you all next time. Take it easy, everyone. Peace.